Good morning, Theodora. Great to see you again, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here. And I just want to thank you for having me on. I hope everyone will take some time to look at my other talks because I tried to make things new because there's so much going on. So I have some new information for everyone. So I'm Theodora Scarato, and I'm Executive Director of Environmental Health Trust. And I have been working for the last decade on technology and how to make technology safer, what the science says, what the policy is showing right now in terms of the incredible actions we're having around the world. But I wanted to start off with what just happened to me in my car the other day with my teenage daughter and her best friend. So, being that I work on cell phones, you can imagine how hard it is as a mother of teenagers to be talking about cell phones emit radiation and here are safer ways to use your cell phone when all the kids are using cell phones all the time. So I picked my daughter up from school with her best friend, and they were just giggling in the car about, dance class and all the things they'd done. And the best friend says, you know, I heard that in 2050, we won't be able to have kids anymore. No one will be able to have babies. And she said, it could be the radiation, knowing that when they, that I work on the issue of radiation and talk about it often. And my daughter says, I think we're headed for catastrophe. And then they start sort of laughing. And then the best friend says, yeah, I heard about this on my period app on her cell phone. And I thought, what is going on? It was so interesting because I'm trying so hard. There are hundreds of scientists who are signing appeals to halt 5G, to reduce exposure to cell phones. So much is happening. And apparently, the period app on a teenager's phone provided this information that's sort of sparking this change. And I just had to share that with you. So the first thing I wanted to say is that everything that is wireless emits microwave, wireless, radio frequency radiation. And I'm going to share my screen with you just to show you some examples and talk about our work. So bear with me while I get the screen. Everything from Wi-Fi Barbie to which is a wireless Barbie that can talk to you and also captures your information and was taken off the market because of so many people complaining about that. Utility meters, baby monitors, your Wii, your wireless consoles, laptops, cell phones, routers, iPads, all the smart things that we have, the smart watches, anything that's smart, light bulbs, smart switches to plug things in, and cell towers which connect iPods. If it's wireless, it emits wireless radiation, and that radiation goes through our bodies and it's absorbed into our brains, into our organs. Now, if you're wondering, well, is it safe? What I have here is just a little excerpt of the Food and Drug Administration's webpage, where they have a title, Scientific Evidence for Cell Phone Safety. And it says, this is the FDA, it says, to date, there is no consistent or credible scientific evidence of health problems caused by exposure to radio frequency energy emitted by cell phones. And then they link to a report. And they say that the FDA's doctors and scientists and engineers are continuing to monitor the scientific studies and public health data for evidence that radio frequency energy from cell phones could cause adverse health effects. And if a credible risk is detected, the FDA will work closely with other federal partners to mitigate the risk. So this is what you see, and most people who go online and see this and don't know the thousands of studies that have been done that show adverse effects will think this is good enough because it is a US government website, and I know many of my friends and family will send this to me as proof of safety. But what they don't know is that that review that they're referring to, it states that a study which the FDA asked for, a $30 million study on cell phone radiation on animals, showed clear evidence of cancer and DNA damage in the animals exposed for long-term cell phone radiation. And they also don't know, that several expert scientists have written to the FDA and called out the inadequacy of that report, because who wrote it? Why are they rejecting the United States National Toxicology Program study? And experts who are experts in environmental impacts, such as birds, bees, trees, and other aspects of our natural environment and wildlife, wrote to the FDA and said, but you're discounting all of this research when there's research on impacts to birds, bees, and trees. And the FDA has not responded to those letters. And that is being used as proof of safety. So just a reminder about the past, and car seats, and this is a car hammock and an auto strap that was used for tots, auto strap for front seat for tots and considered safe. And tobacco, all of this history is being repeated over and over with toxic chemicals, with air pollutants, and now with cell phone radiation. I wanted to show you one of the resources that we have online at Environmental Health Trust, where we have a lot of downloadable fact sheets and images that you can share. But this is like, I would have looked at this a decade ago when I was working on this, and it was just about cell phones. At the time, I got involved because I started reading about cell phone radiation, and I read a lot of research that showed harmful effects. But now, and I would have thought an image like this was just like, whoa, over the top, like what's going on here? But this is our new reality. You walk into these smart homes or many people's homes, and there's numerous wireless devices, from the TV, which we can't even find anymore without Wi-Fi or Bluetooth unless we go searching, because they're all emitting, or the little box that attaches to it. Any one person will have several wireless devices, many of them on their body. You might have an iPad or a laptop, and as well, you might have a cell phone. Wireless keyboards, the wireless printer, which when I went to visit my dad was right next to where he worked. So he was typing on a computer, and next to him was a wireless printer just right touching his body. Most people aren't aware that all wireless devices, and I'm giving you an example here of the virtual speakers like Alexa and the Amazon Echoes, they emit wireless radiation. That's how they connect to the router that you have in your home. But you might not know, and I certainly didn't know. I didn't know any of this when I got started on this a decade ago and went down into the rabbit hole, that all of these devices have fine print warnings, manufacturer's instructions deep in the manuals. For the Amazon Echo, it says information regarding exposure to radio frequency energy. This device should be installed and operated with a minimum distance of 20 centimeters between the radiator and your body. And they also have a section that says, that way it'll be compliant with FCC limits. The Federal Communications Commission has adopted guidelines for human exposure in the United States, and those limits only protect us against heat, and I'm going to talk about that in this talk. However, you can exceed those limits when devices are closer to your body. And then it says in the information, nevertheless, even though there's a section that says, even though it's compliant with FCC limits at the 20 centimeter distance, it's advised to use products in a manner that minimizes the potential for human contact during normal operation. And yet kids are hugging these virtual speakers, listening to stories, listening to songs at night. This is our new reality. Cell phones also have a fine print in them. And cell phones say that they need to be held a certain amount of millimeters from the body. Now, when tests have been done, and the French government actually tested hundreds of cell phones to see in body contact positions what would happen in terms of the radiofrequency radiation, and they found that the majority of them exceeded government limits that they had in the European Union. And when Dr. Om Gandhi, he's a scientist who helped to set limits actually years ago and worked for industry and is now one of our scientific advisors. When he looked at the numbers out of the French government tests, he found that the levels would have exceeded US limits by up to 10 times on some models. Scientists are talking about this all over. We're having now US scientists who are experts in their field who then retired speaking out on this. This is Christopher Portier. He is a retired US government top scientist on this issue. He served as director of the United States National Center for Environmental Health at the CDC and the director of the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry. And he submitted a over 176-page review of the science on cell phone radiation. And he states the evidence on an association between cellular phone use and the risk of glioma in adults is quite strong. And that's because the majority of studies that have been done looking at long-term exposure to heavy use of cell phone use, when you put the phone to your head, in those long-term studies, 10 years, found increases in brain cancer. And the independent studies, I should say, the case control independent studies. And this quote and this report was submitted in a court case. This is a court case with over a dozen people who are alleging that their cell phone use caused their brain cancer and that the industry knew and didn't inform them about this potential risk. Now, what ended up happening was the judge actually barred him as a witness. The case is Murray and Motorola. And he was not allowed to testify, and that report is not going to be a part of this really landmark case, which has been winding through the courts for over a decade, because it would disrupt existing schedule and detrimentally affect the orderliness and efficiency of any trial, because it came in a little late in the game a few years ago. So remember, this has been going for years with various hearings about what evidence can go in and out and who will be the expert witness and so on. And his report is not going to be included. Dr. Linda Birnbaum, who's the former director of the National Institutes of Environmental Health Sciences, is also speaking out on the issue of cell phone radiation and speaking to the results of the National Toxicology Program study that I just told you about. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. So there's many published studies at this point looking at both basic research and also human research, animal research, cellular research. This is a review by Dr. Miller, Lloyd Morgan, Iris Udasin, and Dr. Deborah Davis, who's our founder and president, reviewing the research and concluding that cell phone wireless radiofrequency radiation is a human carcinogen. And Dr. Leonard Hardell has also published extensively on this. So if you're interested in the science, please search their names and go to PubMed and you can read their research. You can also watch their talks, many of which are online or on our YouTube channel or on online on many different resources. Dr. Hardell has testified all over. He also was the lead researcher, one of the lead researchers working on DDT many years ago when it was not so popular to be talking about DDT. So published research on non-ionizing electromagnetic fields, which is what comes out of your cell phone and wireless devices. And I'm also going to be talking about lower frequency radiation that comes out of, say, power lines or electricity, anything that is plugged in, like a charging cell phone, which or laptops, for example, any electronic that has a battery or you plug in and charge. And if it's wireless, it emits wireless radiation and also emits a lower frequency, extremely low frequency fields from the electricity component of it. So what has been found in the research, in published peer-reviewed research? Cancer, as I talked about, DNA damage, and not just in the National Toxicology Program, but in research going way, way back for years, actually. Memory and brain damage. There was a study that was done, and there's several studies, both in animals and in humans, that have found this. But more recently, a study that looked at teenagers and found that teenagers who used cell phones for the long term had, for 1 year. I'm mixing my studies together. It's early in the morning here. Had more memory damage. And the scientists specifically looked at where the exposure was in their brain, the side of the head they used the phone, and modeled that to see what the exposure was in their brain. And then the test they did on memory corresponded to that area of the brain. And they found damage after 1 year in several hundred Swiss teenagers. That was a replication study. So when people say there are no replication studies, it's simply not true. There are actually several studies that have been replication studies. There's also replication studies that have been done on cancer promotion, where you have two kinds of exposures, an electromagnetic field paired with a known toxic exposure that's found effects. And there are many studies that corroborate each other, meaning they might be slightly different, but we're seeing oxidative stress in many different studies in many different labs around the world. Synergistic effects, I talked a little bit about that with the tumor promotion, but there are many studies showing the combination of exposures can increase the effects of the known toxic exposure. Headaches, people are having acute symptoms from wireless radiation, and headaches is the first thing, rashes, dizziness. The list is actually long, and people are not able to be in spaces where the wireless radio frequency is elevated. There's oxidative stress, which can lead to a myriad of effects in our body. There was just a Swiss review done that by experts, worldwide experts, and this is the Swiss government's expert group actually asked for this study, and found these studies, in animal and studies and cell studies showed oxidative stress, and that can lead to a myriad of effects. It can potentiate issues that you might already have, everything from cancer to diabetes, bees and insects and trees. There's studies showing damage to trees that are near cell phone towers, that bees, there are biochemical changes in bees, and insects, which are going to be flying around near our cellular networks. The list is long. And just like tobacco, there's first-hand, second-hand, and third-hand exposures. First-hand exposures would be those devices that you have close to your body that you're using. The phone, the laptop, whatever you have. And sometimes I see people and they have 3 devices, especially college students will have at least 2 at any one time, if not 3 or 4. I was just visiting a college student and I counted 10 wireless devices in a small little dorm room. And that didn't even include the wireless router outside and the cell tower nearby and so forth. Then there's secondhand exposure. That exposure that you receive from those close to you, using devices, such as an adult using a laptop or a cell phone right near the child. And then third-hand exposure, that exposure from the ambient, involuntary exposure you receive when you're just outside and you're near a cell tower, or from all the devices which are in use, in the community near you that are all connecting to that tower. So I want to talk about children for a while here, because I got involved when I saw some headline somewhere, and I didn't really believe there could be a problem. But I happened to end up on the phone one day after my daughters were in a fire, and they were fine, but there were some issues around mercury poisoning from a device that was in the house that potentially they could have inhaled the smoke. And I was on the phone with a doctor. I was on the cell phone in the car a decade ago with the doctor who I'd never talked to, but I knew he was an expert in environmental health. And I said to him with the phone against my head as I was driving, so, now that we assessed that my daughters were okay from the fire, I said, so do you think there's anything, should I be concerned about cell phone radiation since I have you on the phone? And he said, just quiet for a second. And he said, I think you should go see what Dr. Deborah Davis of the Environmental Health Trust has to say. She has the latest science. And I, who had seen that headline about cell phone radiation scrambling a child's brain, that was like the headline. And I, who had gone to our website and thought, this can't be true, was just shocked. And now I am executive director of the Environmental Health Trust. Dr. Deborah Davis is our president. She is speaking out on this with other scientists in the field on a regular basis and working hard. And that's sort of how I got involved with Dr. Davis, as I wrote her an email.
Please welcome to the 2021 Real Truth.
Oh, that's going. So I'm going to share with you this image from research, which Dr. Davis and other scientists from Brazil, electrical engineers, have done. This is published research showing how children have more wireless radiation absorbed into their brain tissue and into different parts of their head compared to adults. And what you're seeing here, before I just show the animation, is imaging that is using supercomputers. The lighter color is showing, this is the wireless radiation coming off the device. You can't see it, you can't smell it, you can't taste it, but it's very much here. And the colors represent the intensity of absorption into the brain tissue. So I'll just show you, this is an animation which actually has been slowed down by millions of times. And as you can see, more of the child's head, because they have smaller heads, they have thinner ears, so the phone is not going to be, with an adult, the phone has more of a space between the head compared to a child. They also have higher water in their brain tissues. So electricity travels in water, and it's going to go quicker and more intensely if there is more water. This is known that young mammals have more water in their tissues and in their brain tissue. So cell phone radiation is more highly and intensely absorbed deeper into the brain of children compared to adults. In addition, children are more vulnerable because they have smaller arms. And when they hold devices, they're closer to their body, and more of their body will be exposed to any one device that is near their body compared to an adult. But perhaps most importantly, children have developing brains, and the developing brain is far more vulnerable to any environmental insult compared to a brain which is more mature. So there are numerous studies. We have all of this on our website at Environmental Health Trust. showing how wireless radiation impacts the brain. There has been not just memory damage, but behavior problems found, hyperactivity in animals and humans. There is significant, the image you're seeing is from Turkish studies where they found decreased and damaged brain cells in animals exposed as adults, or, you know, if a rat could be an adult, and prenatally before they were born. Then they test them and look into their brains and actually count the brain cells later in life after they're born. Impacts to the blood-brain barrier, which can allow more wireless, which can allow more toxic elements into the brain because there's more permeability between the brain and the blood. Altered brain activity was found in a National Institutes of Health study that was done several years ago. And they found that when a cell phone was turned on near the brain, that there was more an uptick in the metabolism of glucose in that area. So when it said that, well, we're not affected at all, I mean, there's obviously are going to be effects if there is an exposure that is absorbed into our body and changes into the way our brain functions. Now, at the time, it was stated that this is what with the NIH study, actually, and you can go look up Dr. Volkov's study and watch her talks about it, where she says that she now will keep the phone away from her head. And that more research will be done on this issue, that we need to do more research and find out what's going on. And as far as I know, I have not seen any more research on this subject coming out of NIH after that study. There was Yale research that looked at animals prenatally exposed. Dr. Hugh Taylor, chief of obstetrics at Yale Medicine, and his team found that when pregnant mice were exposed to cell phone radiation, that they had decreased memory and more hyperactivity. And in the press conference for the Baby Safe Project, and please look up the Baby Safe Project, that's educating pregnant women about reducing exposure to their babies, signed by hundreds of doctors and educational experts and public health officials. So when he talks about that study, and I remember when it first came out, he said, well, we're going to do more research on this. This is so important. I haven't seen any more research come out of Yale looking at cell phone radiation to mice on this issue. There has been, I will say, with a separate team, study looking at thyroid cancer that found increased thyroid cancer in people who use cell phones heavily when they had genetic susceptibilities. And this issue of genetic susceptibility is, of course, not included in the way we set limits in our governments on this issue. There's research that shows, and this is replicated research actually, that women who are pregnant, who use cell phones more than in the kids, there were more behavior problems. There's several studies on that. University of California School of Public Health. Here's just a slide from the Turkish laboratory looking at prenatal exposure and how it alters brain development in rats. You can see the control here. The cells show intact shape. And then over here, deterioration. This is the control group. This is the exposed group. And there are many of these studies. And yet, this is what is the norm these days. This is an image showing how Dr. Leif Salford's research, and this is from over a decade ago now. Microwaves can damage the blood-brain barrier, and these are images from his research. He gave a talk that I recommend. If you go to Environmental Health Trust, please look up the section where we have scientific conferences. And he presented in 2009 with the studies that his laboratory did looking at animals exposed to wireless radio frequency. There's a study published in Fertility and Sterility, which is one of several studies showing impacts to reproductive organs, to sperm, and et cetera. And in this particular study was entitled Use of Laptop Computers Connected to Internet through Wi-Fi decreases human sperm motility and increases sperm DNA fragmentation. And yet, this is common. I certainly had that laptop on my lap for many, many years. In fact, I didn't think I could live without Wi-Fi. And I couldn't even imagine considering that there could ever be anything wrong with these devices that I loved and used so much. But this is our new reality. This is what we see in the halls of schools, in our homes. In a study that was done looking at reviewing the research on oxidative stress, of 100 studies, 93 found they induced oxidative stress. And that was in 2015. That review was published. And I told you more recently, the Swiss expert group review was published. Several years ago, the California Department of Health released their advisory on cell phone radiation, stating that children are more vulnerable to cell phone radiation. And here's how you can decrease exposure. The advisory talked about knowing when the radiation exposures were highest, which is when there are large files, when you're in an area of low signal, when you're moving a video. And so video and pictures will use more than, say, a text. Of course, if you're moving thousands of texts every day, which our kids are, it doesn't mean texting is safe. And what are our kids doing? They are sending pictures and video. What are adults doing? It seems like everyone is doing now on social media, on the phone, completely unaware that the phone is creating exposures to our bodies. So the recommendations of the California Department of Health included use speakerphone, sleep. Well, I don't recommend sleeping with the phone at arm's length. We recommend turning the phone off at night, giving yourself a break. We have a lot of recommendations which are actually using corded phones and minimizing use as much as possible, but don't sleep with your phone. Don't keep it in your pocket, said the California Department of Health. But what most people don't know is that when this advisory was put forward by the California Department of Health, it had been redrafted dozens of times for almost a decade, and finally released because Dr. Joel Moskowitz of University of California, Berkeley, did a public information request. And when because he knew, and many scientists were aware, that California had this draft that they were drafting and redrafting, and they refused to release it until the pressure of the press and so forth. And the other thing that's on our website at Environmental Health Trust, ehtrust.org, is the fact that the first drafts were actually to protect the employees of the state of California. The first drafts were not what you see when you go to the California Department of Health, a nice little 2-pager that tells you how to reduce exposure to cell phones. The first draft said things like, the state needs to purchase lower radiating devices, that employees, California state employees, need to be educated about how to reduce their exposure to cell phones, as well as home cordless phones, because home cordless phones emit wireless radio frequency radiation, as do cell phones. And they also said that the research was enough to conclude that these actions should happen. It wasn't if you are worried. So here is the history. And there's so much history like that. The last decade is just recent history. There have been scientists working on this for several decades. And I stand on their shoulders working on this issue. So this is the city of Berkeley's cell phone right to know on cell phones notice. In 2015, Berkeley passed a law, the Cell Phone Right to Know Act, my battery's running out. 1 second. Okay. In 2015, the city of Berkeley passed the cell phone right to know ordinance, requiring that when you bought your phone, there would be a sign and you would be informed of the following. To assure safety, the federal government requires that cell phones meet radio frequency exposure guidelines. If you carry or use your phone in a pants or shirt pocket or tucked into a wireless network, you may exceed the federal guidelines for exposure to radio frequency radiation. Now, when it was first passed, it also said the potential risk is greater for children. Of course, the industry sued, just like they sued the city of San Francisco in years prior and stopped that act from being passed. And in the legal process, that statement, the potential risk is greater for children, was removed in order to withstand the challenges ahead. It withstood many court challenges. It even went where it was brought to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said, knocked it back down, said, we're not going to take action on this, and which maintained it. And then more recently, it lost in California. There was a court case where now we're in a position where the ordinance is no longer in effect. And our right to know is, we have no right to know in California on that. Most people don't know. There are case studies that are published showing breast cancer tied with cell phone radiation. Young women are putting the phone in their bra. It's a handy place to carry a phone. I mean, people are putting the phone in their pants pocket or in their tight spandex pants, and when you're going out on the town, in the bra, or all day in the bra, as some women are doing. And they found unusual breast cancers located underneath, right where the antennas of the phone were. And these are young women with no family history of breast cancer. And yet, there are many ads, and industry is putting forth, promoting themselves as partnering to protect us with the pink ribbons. This is just life, right? Everyone has the phone in their back pocket. Well, on the side, I have there a recent study put forward by Dr. Miller and Dr. Deborah Davis of Environmental Health Trust, and researchers looking at the astronomical increase in colorectal cancer in the last decade. In young adults, a 4-fold increase. Now, what is talked about in this paper, called the increased generational risk of colon and rectal cancer in recent birth cohorts in under age 40, the hypothetical role of radiofrequency radiation from cell phones, is that colorectal cancer cells are exquisitely sensitive to radiofrequency radiation in cellular studies that have been done. And remember that when a cell phone is in your pocket or on your body or anywhere, as long as it's powered on, it is radiating. It is always connecting to the tower, whether you're using it or not, because it's doing a handshake with the tower. And yet we are unaware. This is the World Health Organization website, where if you want to know what does the WHO have to say, you find this wonderful picture of a toddler being handed a cell phone. And it says, under the section, are there any health effects? A large number of studies have been performed over the last 2 decades to assess whether mobile phones pose a potential health risk. To date, no adverse health effects have been established as being caused by mobile phone use. This statement on the WHO website is used the world over by cell tower companies, by cell phone companies. Whenever anyone says there might be a problem, this is used. Well, how did this web page even get here? Who made that determination? What studies would they say a large number of studies? What are they talking about? Well, here's the fact that most of us aren't aware of, and that is that the WHO EMF project was started by Michael Repiccioli. I'm going to share with you a short video of him talking, so pardon the better image of him, who was funneling money from telecom through a hospital. He started both the World Health Organization EMF project, and he started the International Commission for Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection, a big and fancy name. Only, and it's called ICNIRP for short, the acronym. And here he is later, he's a known industry consultant now. There has been no review of wireless radiofrequency radiation by the World Health Organization EMF project since 1993. And it states it on their website. And when we wrote them and we said, when has the WHO EMF project reviewed research, they're not answering. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Now, there's an important distinction everyone needs to know, and let me just stop this for a second. There is a difference between the World Health Organization EMF project and the World Health Organization International Agency for the Research on Cancer. These are two separate entities. One was started by Michael Rapaccioli. The EMF project, there's no oversight, there's no accountability. There is, we don't even know, where did that statement come from? The International Agency for the Research on Cancer is a separate entity, and they determine that wireless and cell phones were a class 2B possible carcinogen a decade ago, almost a decade ago now. And now many of those scientists are stating that it is a human carcinogen. So let me just share with you Michael Rapaccioli talking about children and cell phones. And this is on the GSMA, that is one of the international cell phone company, all the conglomerate of companies get together and they have these large organizations that put forward information on cell phones.
But we couldn't find anything that above the age of 2, the development process seemed to have concluded to the point that radio frequency fields wouldn't cause any adverse consequence after that age.
It sounds from the conclusions of that group like parents shouldn't be worried about allowing their children to use mobile phones.
Let's face it, mobile phones are here to stay. Children love mobile phones. It's one of their best means of communication. It's also a safety issue. Children should be encouraged to use technology. Otherwise, they'll be left while other children are using the technology, and the jobs are going to go to children who knew the technology very well at a young age. So certainly from the health viewpoint, there is no concern that we've seen this far to indicate that parents need to be worried about children's use of mobile phones.
And you can go to the work of Dr. Leonard Hardell. He has a publication called the World Health Organization, A Hard Nut to Crack, where he details the industry ties and the conflicts of interest related to Michael Rapaccioli, his long history, as well as these groups that we look to as being the authorities on the matter, and how there is actually a lack of a science base and independent review or any oversight for these groups which are claiming safety. This is another imaging study that looked at the cell phone radiation exposure from a wireless tablet into the brain of a child. This was modeling that electrical engineers did regarding the iPad, just a few inches from the face, which is how children use them. And the colors represent the intensity of the exposure into the brains of children. And in this particular, it was a 6-year-old child. They take different aged models and then look at what the exposure might be for an adult, for a 6-year-old, for a 10-year-old, for a 12-year-old. So this radiation is going into their brains. And here is a commercial showing kids using virtual reality, where you hold the phone right up to your eyes. So children have developing brains and they have developing eyes. This radiation is going into their brains, into their eyes. And here is a study, another imaging study. This is representing the phone that looked at virtual reality positions. And this is an adult, this is one looking at a child, and you can see the highest exposures and how deeply that level of exposure goes into the brain. There's research showing, as I talked about, impacts to the male reproductive system. This is images looking at testes development. This is imaging that was done looking at a phone in the pocket and the intensities that would come from the phone radiation, both into the body and also looking at how it propagated through space. This is imaging that's done looking at a pregnant woman and the fetus, and at what are the exposures that the baby would receive. And it found higher levels into the body when the fetus, when you are many more months along, of course, because the baby's head is more on the surface, and yet women are resting cell phones against their abdomen like a shelf. But the reason I have this particular picture is that it says CTIA. This is the United States lobbying group for the wireless industry. This is a video that they have online entitled "The Focus on Education, Health, and Safety." And they have a smiling pregnant woman with the phone right above her abdomen. Now, importantly, and you can please learn more at Environmental Health Trust. Glad to, there's so much, we have videos on children, scientific lectures on impacts to pregnant women. We have Dr. Hugh Taylor speaking about his research on memory. Many of the scientists who I'm talking about have their lectures, very technical lectures online at Environmental Health Trust. Even at lower levels, so even if you're not 9 months pregnant or 8 months pregnant, there are exposures that will be received in your body and in your developing pregnancy. Now, the American Academy of Pediatrics has for years been writing to the US government calling for changes to the exposure limits that we have. And after the National Toxicology Program study, they came out with tips on how to reduce your cell phone radiation exposure, cell phone safety tips for families. They don't come down on one side. They don't say that it's proven or not proven. They say, here's how you can reduce exposure. And like many organizations, they recommend reducing exposure because, and around the world, because it makes sense, especially for children. The Vienna Medical Association, the Cyprus National Committee on Environmental Children's Health, the Cyprus Medical Association, Athens Medical Association, the Italian Society for Preventative and Social Pediatrics. I can talk on and on about these, the French Agency for Food, Environmental and Occupational Health and Safety, ANSES. The Council of Europe has a resolution, Resolution 1815, recommending reducing exposure to children and reducing exposure in schools and communities. The Connecticut Department of Public Health says, you know, when it comes to cell phones, it's wise. They use the word wise to reduce exposure. And thousands of scientists and doctors are calling to halt 5G and reduce wireless exposure. The 2020 consensus statement of the United Kingdom and international medical and scientific experts is signed by individual experts as well as groups representing hundreds of medical professionals. And I'd like to point out the EMF scientist appeal. So you can look that up, EMF scientist appeal, that has been signed by over 250 scientists who are experts in the field of wireless and non-ionizing electromagnetic radiation. And they are stating we need to reduce exposure. The limits that we have as to what is safe or what are our acceptable levels of exposure are not protective, and urgent action is needed. And they're writing the World Health Organization, the United Nations. Now, if you go to the American Academy of Pediatrics website, they also have a section on electromagnetic fields, which states when it comes to cell phones, they talk about cell towers. In recent years, concern has increased about exposure to radio frequency electromagnetic radiation emitted from cell phones and phone station antenna. An Egyptian study confirmed concerns that living nearby mobile phone base stations increased the risk for developing headaches, memory problems, dizziness, depression, sleep problems. This is on their website. It does need to be updated, I have to say, because there are many studies that have found associations between cell towers and a myriad of effects in both surveys that have been done and also studies where they have measured the wireless radio frequency radiation in homes, looked at the distance from the cell antennas, measured the different markers in the blood and found changes in the blood. And I talk about that in my other Real Truth About Health lectures. So I hope you'll watch that too, because I try to bring some new information to this one. A lot of those research studies. This is an example of imaging. I showed you imaging into the body and so forth. Here's some imaging that's done looking at, okay, so when there are antennas that are on buildings, where's the intense levels of exposure? How does it move through the air and so forth? This is actually from Krakow, Poland government, where they are looking at this issue, measuring the radiation and informing people about the levels in their community. And actually many countries, over a dozen countries, regularly measure wireless radio frequency radiation and post it publicly as to what the numbers are. Now, the limits that they say are safe are not necessarily safe, but at least they're measuring. Whereas in the United States, we're not measuring at all. There's no measuring going on in different cities by our federal government to ensure compliance. Instead, we rely on the companies to present their information if they're being compliant with FCC limits. And now we're in the area of 5G. 5G is going to mean cell towers brought closer to humans and people than ever before. Cell antennas placed on our utility poles, on our street lights, and new poles. And you can imagine if this is your house, this is quite close to the bedroom window. We are sent images all the time by people writing us saying, I have this outside my window. You know, what do you think about it? I'm going to show you some images of that. And should I be concerned? Is it safe? 5G will mean hundreds of thousands of new wireless installations placed on poles and on buildings close, meaning, 20, 30 feet high poles, not those tall macro towers we've had, which, by the way, are not safe. But now we're adding in all of these new wireless antennas. And I think estimates are about 400 billion new wireless devices that will all connect in this new Internet of Things, part of the 5th generation rollout, which also includes more 4G antennas. And so here's some examples of what I'm talking about. This was an apartment I stayed in San Francisco, and I looked out my window, and there was the small cell. And look, right next door, in the room next to me, was this window just feet from that antenna. And they come with these ugly utility boxes too, which drops property values. We have a whole webpage on our website about this if you're interested. So the U.S. Blumenthal, Senator Blumenthal, several months ago, there was a hearing. And I'd like to play with you excerpts from this hearing, as well as these are excerpts from his press conference, where he asked the question of safety related to 5G. He said, are you doing any safety studies? And the answer from industry, this is a panel of industry in front of him, they said no. And here's his response.
So there really is no research ongoing. We're kind of flying blind here, so far as health and safety is concerned. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What happens when thousands of these cells begin appearing near schools, community centers, homes, and workplaces? And what happens to the workers who are up there repairing them? What happens to the folks who are walking by them every day, school children? And the younger the children, the more susceptible to the radio frequencies they may be.
Here's an example of a picture sent to me by a young man living in an apartment in California. This is a small cell for 5G. This is what it looks like. And this is the window of his apartment where he lives. Now there's research that's been done looking at, well, what's it gonna be like when we add all of these small cells? Industry will say, or the industry representative says, look, a small cell has much less power and much, it's much lower power than that tall, cell tower. But we're talking about all of these new antennas. So what would it really mean? This was a study. These images are from a study that was done looking at Austin, Texas. What the engineers did is they looked at the current network, the current wireless network in Austin, Texas, and they said if we were to deploy millimeter wave throughout the entire city, what equipment would be needed? What would the network need? And what would the wireless radio frequency power densities be in the community? Now they conclude the 5G mobile networks cannot be yet classified as safe for the public, and the study they did demands serious considerations before using millimeter wave communications given the potential harm it could afford on the public. And they say that because if you look at this image, this is the before, this is the current LTE network that's in place. I'm not saying this is safe. What I'm saying is this is the current network. This is the power density imaging and the simulations they did for if the 5G millimeter wave network were going to be deployed. It elevates the wireless radio frequency ambient exposures throughout the community. Now, this isn't the only study done that has shown this. And we have on our website at Environmental Health Trust several studies where they've done looking at what is the exposure before and after small cell networks have been deployed. And yet, when advertisements by nonprofit organizations like this one, this was out of the Electrosensitivity UK, they tried to raise awareness with posters. It says, how safe is 5G? It quotes Dr. Martin Paul. It quotes the EMF scientist appeal. It quotes the European Union, the 5G appeal to the European Union, also signed by many scientists. And it was banned. One of many posters that nonprofit health associations have tried to raise awareness in the community, put up around town in their areas. And of course, complaints are made and those posters are banned. This was banned in the United Kingdom. Real quick look at what is safe. So the regulations we have now for cell phone radiation are, if you know anything, I hope, because if you don't know this fact, it's hard when you're reading the science. And I think everyone will be reading more about this. So know this fact. Heating is the only harm according to the Federal Communications Commission and most governments around the world. The assumption is that wireless radio frequency radiation, which is microwaves, only can hurt us if it heats us, kind of like meat is cooked. This was based on research done in the 70s and 80s on small animals, where animals had a rectal thermometer and they increased the microwave radiation on them. And when they changed their behavior, they stopped pressing a pedal for food. That's when the scientists, many of the military scientists said, okay, that's the level of harm. Heating is the only harm. And I have this piece of meat because the other crazy thing about our limits is that they average the heating. So not only do they only measure heat, but they average it. Now, if you have a piece of meat and you have it on a fire and one side is getting burnt and the other side is relatively raw, you could average the cooking of the whole thing and say, well, this meat is not burnt because I averaged the heat. But that is actually how we test cell phones. We average the heat. So even if there's an intense level in one part of the tissue, in one area, if it's less a little bit later, and it gets a little complex as to how they do it, but I want to show you an image of this. They say the number based on averaging. Can you imagine averaging? So even in regards to heating, they're doing it wrong. But heating is not the only harm, but yet that is what we base our limits on. This is an image showing how we test cell phones for radiation. And they take this thermometer, they put it in this plastic head filled with liquid, and they take the thermometer and they put it around and look at different sections, and they take the temperature. There we have the phone. There is an ear that has a spacer. It serves as a spacer. Here's how they test for other devices. They might put the phone underneath. This is the body phantom, except our brains are not made of sugar liquid. We have developing brains with different tissues in them. Research has shown that stem cells, which are more active in children, are more activated, more affected by wireless modulated radiofrequency radiation. I have here a logo, We Are Not SAM. I wanted to talk about that for a minute because We Are Not SAM is a new campaign out of folks in Australia calling to boycott 5G cell phones. And what they say is, hey, we are not SAM. Oh, I forgot to mention, going back to this, SAM stands for the Standard Anthropomorphic Mannequin. And this adult head is what is used to test cell phones. It's called SAM. The United States has no federally developed safety standards for wireless radiation. In the 1990s, the Environmental Protection Agency was actively looking to set safety guidelines, safety limits, and they were fully defunded. What I'm showing you here is actually slides from a FOIA investigation, not by myself, but they show that the EPA was presenting on these safety limits. We have documents showing where they say, we're working on it, we're going to have these limits, it's really important. We'll have exposure guidelines for heating and also for non-heating modulation effects. But they were defunded, and the United States government adopted limits based on industry-funded groups. Those limits were set in 1996. Excuse me. Here is an image, and actually this is ended in 2013, so there's a lot more science now. But this is the year when current FCC limits were developed, and this shows how many publications on non-ionizing electromagnetic fields were in the published literature on PubMed. And as you can see, there's many studies past then, and yet there's been no action. There's been no change to our limits. Please do look at the work of Dr. Henry Lai and go to Microwave News as well, where there is documentation, also the Bioinitiative as well, that Dr. Lai has published, put forward research, evaluating the research. So when you have industry studies, they more often don't show an effect. When you have non-industry studies that are funded independently, they more often do find an adverse effect. Here's an example of an image sent to us by a woman with a tumor, and she tells her story. We post, whenever people write us with their stories, we put it online, and she is sending out a warning note not to put the cell phone to the head. And yet so many people do this with the phone, which is radiating not only your brain, but your thyroid, your neck, and of course the babies. And this was me. I used a cell phone. I put the cell phone in the baby wrap. That's what I did. No one told me. Here's a pictures from Diagnosis Funk, which is a nonprofit group out of Germany. The Doctors Working Group on Digital Media just recently, this was this week, had a campaign with a protest. They had a large banner and signs in front of the Ministry of Social Affairs, and they handed over an open letter on the subject of mobile phones and safety for kids. The doctors demanded that smartphones not be in the hands of children. They wanted wireless radiation-free hospital rooms and advice for information for people with electrosensitivity. And they had a scroll where they talked about the psychosocial and health consequences of our ever-increasing use of digital media. And they called for a ban on wireless in schools as well. Now, with the 5G and the Internet of Things, we are just going all in the wrong direction. And there are hundreds of cities and communities waking up in the United States, as well as. So this is an image showing one of the protests in Italy, where there are 600 municipalities that have passed resolutions to halt 5G. There are protests that are happening around the world. This is Amsterdam, Australia, California, many cities in California, Belgium, South Africa, Italy, New South Wales, Australia, New Zealand, Greece, Cyprus, Spain, England. We have many of this on our website. This is Juhi Chawla. She received the Indira Gandhi Memorial Award for her work on cell phone radiation and raising awareness about it. She is a famous actress in India, and she has been working on this for years, ever since she realized that in her apartment building across the way were all these cell antennas. Please learn about her, Juhi Chawla. You can go online. Here she is. It's an incredible speech she does talking about the importance of taking action on this issue. I'm just going to play a short clip of it.
We wouldn't want that 20 years down the line, we have an entire population of young children, young adults, old, suffering from various health effects due to our negligence, our inaction, or our ignorance. ये उन्होंने तब कहा था.
And you can watch her whole speech. So if wireless radiation is so safe, how come wireless companies warn their shareholders of risks, but not their customers, not the residents who live near their networks? We have a whole section on Environmental Health Trust dedicated to this issue. The Crown Castle, Verizon, Vodafone, all of the cell phone companies actually state to their shareholders information such as Crown Castle, who's putting up small cell 5G short small cells everywhere. If radio frequency emissions from wireless handsets or equipment on our communications infrastructure are demonstrated to cause negative health effects, potential future claims could adversely affect our operations, costs, or revenues. And we currently do not maintain any significant insurance with respect to these matters. They don't have insurance because no insurance company will insure them for the long-term damages from radio frequency radiation, unless you get a special pollutant insurance, actually. Here is an image from a Vodafone where they're under the figure of our principal risks and interdependencies. They have climate change, Brexit, and they have the pandemic, and they have electromagnetic fields. This Swiss Re, which is an insurance authority, published a report on 5G, rating it off the leash. 5G is a high-impact emerging risk, affecting property and casualty claims and increasing cybersecurity threats. And insurance, when you buy a phone and you get insurance from AT&T or Sprint or T-Mobile, such as I have here, in the fine print, it says, we will not pay for loss caused directly or indirectly by pollutants. Under the definition of pollutants, it says pollutants means any solid, liquid, gaseous, or thermal irritant or contaminant, including smoke, vapor, soot, fumes, acid, etc., chemicals, and artificially produced electric fields, magnetic fields, sound waves, microwaves, and all artificially produced ionizing or non-ionizing radiation and waste. So it's defined as a pollutant by the companies themselves. Many white papers are on our website where it's discussed as the next asbestos. Please take a look at Dr. Deborah Davis, our president and founder's books, The Secret History of the War on Cancer and Disconnect, The Truth About Cell Phone Radiation. There is reports we have online showing how industry has inserted itself into the science and policy. This report is a Harvard report called Captured Agency, documenting how the Federal Communications Commission is a captured agency, and how US Congress receives millions from industry. So we have tactics, which are big tobacco tactics, being used when it comes to cell phone radiation. And the FCC is captured because former industry executives and lawyers have gone on to become leadership at the Federal Communications Commission. And then when they leave, they turn around and go back to industry, as is the case for Tom Wheeler, who used to head up the wireless industry CTIA, then became the chair of the FCC, laid the groundwork for 5G, and now is back, by the way, advising our government. He was quoted in a recent GAO report. You have Ajit Pai, he just left as chair of the FCC, former Verizon lawyer, FCC chair, now working for Capital Partners, and which has telecommunications work. Here's Tom Wheeler as talking at the CTIA, and here he is as the FCC. This is not special to the United States. In Italy, here we have Vodafone CEO, who is now Minister for Technological Innovation and Digital Transition in the government. Just goes on and on. The CDC has web pages that we have documentation are written by industry-funded scientists. This page, according to our FOIAs, was written under the tutelage, or when there was a scientist brought on as a subject matter expert to help them draft this text, who we know was funded by industry because it states it on his papers, and also because for Dr. Kenneth Foster, who was brought on for the CDC, if you go to the Mobile and Wireless Forum, that's one of those large wireless organizations made up of all the wireless companies around the world. They talk about, they have the report on all the research that they've sponsored. And here's an example of their 5G research. And here you see Foster, 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 Foster. And of course, he's been published for years by with funding from industry to do so. He also helped to do the CDC webpage on non-ionizing radiation, where if you go to this page, good luck to you to find anything about the risk from exposure to non-ionizing radiation. If you don't know anything about the issue, you go to the CDC, you find this page. It says, what is the risk from exposure to non-ionizing radiation? And then it talks about how we're exposed, that may result in damage to heat, but this is not common and mainly of concern in the workplace for those who work with large sources of non-ionizing radiation devices and instruments. If you click on that link, you're going to go to a page that I think will confuse most people. It's an outdated page at the OSHA. Absolutely not, oh, sorry about that, not useful to finding out basic things like, is there science showing harm? What does the science say? Instead, we are just led down a hole to what, as if there's no problem. I did a FOIA request to the Federal Communications Commission on whether they'd ever done a environmental assessment on 5G. And they stated that they have reviewed the records. They found 2 emails and 3 draft documents responsive to my request. And these records are being withheld completely under a FOIA exemption. Number 5, the EPA's websites were all completely scrubbed and redone in 2019. Now, they didn't have all the information on them previous to this, but they did say that, that safety was still, the research was still being done, a little bit more nuanced, but now everything was completely redone. And it says things like, a few studies have connected radio frequency and health effects, but scientists have not been able to repeat the outcomes. The New Hampshire Commission on 5G and Health and Environment was formed from a law that was passed a few years ago in New Hampshire. a commission came together and worked for an entire year to review the science and on the health impacts and environmental impacts of 5G. Their report, so I hope everyone on this call takes a look at the New Hampshire report on 5G. They recommend in an independent study of 5G health effects that the FCC should do an environmental assessment on 5G, that federal agencies with ecological knowledge should develop radio frequency radiation limits that will protect trees, bees, birds, insects, and pollinators, because we have no limits that were ever set to protect our wildlife. And here's another image of an antenna with the intensity. This is from Kakao again. Birds, bees, trees, they will be receiving those intense exposures, even higher than humans. This picture, shockingly, was on a PowerPoint done by a telecommunications, in a telecommunications presentation. And here we have birds with a nest right on the antennas. Birds perch on antennas. When I wrote the EPA about this, and you can go online and read the long letter, I said, so what agency has reviewed the research on damage to trees? And they said, they don't have a funded mandate for radio frequency radiation matters. What agency has reviewed the research on impacts to birds and bees? And the EPA told me, the EPA does not have a funded mandate for radio frequency radiation matters. What agency has reviewed the research on damage to memory from cell phone radiation? And the EPA said, EPA's last review was in the 1984 document, Biological Effects of Radio Frequency Radiation. And if you go to that, there are documented many effects that were found at that time in various studies. Here again is birds. Here's a cell phone case that's decorated with bees. I mean, it just blows my mind because bees have been shown to be impacted by wireless radiation. The New Hampshire Commission also recommended a multimedia campaign to educate the public on how to minimize radio frequency radiation, especially for newborns, pregnant women, via radio, television, multimedia. They also recommended setbacks between cell network infrastructure and schools and homes. They recommended establishing wireless-free zones and educating the medical community to develop protocols for people harmed by electromagnetic fields. I have here doctors and public health officials from the Archbishop Macarius Hospital, where they have removed wireless from the pediatric and neonatal units. You can go online into Environmental Health Trust and watch on our YouTube channel, as well as our web pages of the work of Cypress and a video that they made about that. They recommend, the New Hampshire Commission recommends software and hardware changes to reduce radio frequency radiation from the body. Actions in the United States include resolutions to halt 5G from Keene, New Hampshire, Hawaii County, Hawaii, Easton, Connecticut, Farragut City, Tennessee. Resolutions related to the federal government taking action from localities, from cities in Florida, Indiana, Bend, Oregon, New York, and resolutions calling for other changes to federal law so cities can control where these antennas go in their communities. Let me get this piece. There are many cities that have established setbacks between wireless antennas and homes, especially in California and in New York and other cities. We have this all on our website at environmentalhealthtrust.org. There are many places where there are setbacks. So here's some example of setbacks. 1,000 feet in Calabasas, California, and Petaluma, 500 feet of these small cells distanced from homes. There are cell tower setbacks for schools and homes in different communities like Shelburne, Massachusetts, or Walnut, California, or Palo Alto, California, or even in Oklahoma, where they have a 1,500 foot setback between the cell tower and a residence or structure. Here's some examples of what we have online for you at Environmental Health Trust. These are resources you can download showing what countries are doing what. We also have one on the United States. We have information on the over 20 governments recommending that you reduce cell phone radiation, especially to children. Schools and homes are regarded as sensitive areas, and we have links to the laws that they have in their respective countries. So I have so much, my time is running short, but in addition to keeping the phone away from your head, reducing your time on the phone, using corded connections, please do not sleep near charging devices. This is like the #1 easy low-hanging fruit. At night, have a safe space. Create a low EMF sleep sanctuary. Don't have charging devices, don't have wireless devices near your bed. Use a battery-powered alarm clock. If you have a smart meter, ensure it is an analog meter. See if you can get an analog meter on your home because they emit wireless radiation. They also pollute the electricity in the home. Find a local smart meter or 5G group in your state. Get a corded landline for your home and office. Can't recommend this enough, so that you can have your long voice calls on a corded landline. Devices should not be on the laps of children or your own body or anyone's body. Always have devices on a table. Turn the wireless radiation off and use corded connections. You can get Ethernet. This is what it looks like. Plug in your mouse and all your peripherals with wires, corded, not with wireless or Bluetooth. We have information on how to do this on our website at Environmental Health Trust, ehtrust.org. Here's my computer and how it's set up with a wire. Here's a tablet setup. Here's how you can use a corded connection. And here's our website, Environmental Health Trust. We hope you will join us. Take a look at what we have. We have resources showing how 5G is going to exponentially increase energy use. And I think I've come to an end here. But thank you so much, and I look forward to coming back next year.
Theodora, this is Ben from The Real Truth. Thank you. This was incredibly informative, very thorough presentation. We thank you for that, and obviously downright alarming. Everyone, you can see ehtrust.org on your screen. Absolutely the best place to go for this information and more, and that's where you can reach Theodora as well. And so Theodora, you ready for some questions?
Sure.
Wonderful. We really appreciate that. So what we're going to do, some people know, some people don't. We want to make sure everybody does know a little bit of housekeeping. We take questions by having our audience raise their hands. And so we don't take questions directly from the chat box. So in case anybody doesn't know how to raise their hand, what you're going to do is you'll find a reactions tab in your Zoom tools. You click on your reactions tab. There should be a little emoji there that says raise hand. You click on raise hand. In case you don't have a reactions tab, some people don't, you click on your participants tab and you should be able to find the raise hand function there. And by the way, we see lots of raised hands coming in for you, Theodora, so get ready. And so that said, what's the other thing? I guess I just want to tell our audience and ask our audience, please keep your questions direct and brief for Theodora. We want to get to as many people as we possibly can and give everyone a chance. So we also ask that you only ask one question and we move forward with that. So that said, Theodora, let's get rolling. Our first question, our tech team will ask Yaron or Yaron, hopefully I've pronounced one of those correctly. Unmute yourself, please. Thanks.
Yes, so you pronounced it correctly. The name is Yaron. So thank you very much, Theodora, for the great presentation. You talked at the very end briefly about the smart meters. And I have, one electrical smart meter outside of my house wall from Eversource, and I have also water smart meter in my basement. Can you please elaborate a little bit more? How can I get rid of them, or what action do I need to do in order to get them out of my house?
Where do you live?
I'm living in Ashland, Massachusetts.
Okay, so you have to find out if you have the option to opt out of the smart meter in your community with your power company. In some states, it's free to actually replace that with a non-radiating meter. And in other places, you have to pay a fee, which is unconscionable, but that's what's happening now. So find out if you can opt out. Now, when you first call the company, I'm going to warn everyone here, the person on the phone might not know what you're talking about and often tries to dissuade people from opting out. But what you need to ask for, if you can, is an analog meter. And you don't want the smart meter, you don't want a digital meter, you want an analog meter. Now, I have a problem in my community where I can't get an analog meter anymore. I used to have it. I've moved 3 times. I paid the fee 3 times, the $75 fee. I pay $15 every month. But there are organizations in your community, Stop Smart Meter Groups or the 5G group, and they will have that information, what you can do in your community to opt out, because you can get more. And don't, please, if you have a meter on your home, don't have your bedroom where you have your bed right up against that wall that has the meter.
Thank you, Theodora. Up next, we have Mary. Mary, if you go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, Theodora. Thanks so much for this great presentation. I'm a recent almost victim of a practice that's going on in the highly dense population where I lived. And that is that these guys are walking around interviewing apartment dwellers and trying to get permission to put 5G meters on the roofs of large apartment buildings. I moved from the building because my board wanted to put meters on our roof, and I had the top floor apartment. I just wanted to let people know that's happening. And I have a single question related to the hopeless feeling I have, which is, how can we make any progress when industry is doing the studies and is hand in hand with government and in a position to bankrupt government when they sue government for not letting them put up their various devices?
That's right. I mean, I will tell you, I have talked to many people who are that top dweller on an apartment building that have gotten very sick from those antennas going on top, dizziness, headache, sleepiness. So how do we address this? Many hands make light work. This is one of those, well, all of these issues require everyone getting involved in the issue. I do believe we will get there. We are making progress because industry is starting to fight back. For a while, they were ignoring this issue. Now they are fighting back with their deep pockets, with educational campaigns about how safe this is, but continuing to put the science out, talk to your local officials, organize with people in your community on this. And I realize that people are going to say, oh, it's safe. I went to the FDA, I went to the CDC, it's safe. But there are people in every state that are working on this issue. And the more people who are determined, because I'm going to say nothing's going to stop me. This is what I'm working on. And, you know, someone might say, oh, I close that door, I go to another door. That's how we're going to get this. We have changes happening. So I know industry has deep pockets, but the truth is going to come out, but we must keep pushing.
Thank you, Theodora. Up next, we have Michael. Michael, if you can unmute, please.
Hi, Theodora. Thank you for all the work that you do. So I have a practical question. I think that relates to all of us here, relating to smartphones. I called a major telecom company asking if these 5G phones, the 5G enabled phones, if you just switch the toggle off, because they said you could switch it off, whether the phone itself would still come in contact or have communicate with the cell towers that are the new 5G ones. And they said, no, you won't have a problem. Put me on hold, came back and said, because I said, what if someone is sensitive to EMF? I'm not, but I was just asking. He said, yeah, then maybe don't get the 5G enabled phones. So I'm wondering, are there practical, is there a guide or resource out there for all the phones, smartphones that one may entertain switching to if they're due for an upgrade that wouldn't have additional radiation as a result of being in contact with the new 5G infrastructure?
This is a very good question. And several years ago, there used to be ratings that we did, and you can certainly go online and find the SAR limits for various phones. But that, at this point, we don't recommend that anymore because what we do recommend, because it's gotten so complicated with all the new models. The new 5G phones will have numerous antennas. They'll have Wi-Fi, two Wi-Fi, Bluetooth. The 5G antennas could be 5 or 6 antennas on each phone, and cellular network, all kinds of antennas on one phone. We recommend not upgrading to 5G as much as possible. there are hundreds of models, so we can't recommend one or the other. But what we're finding is that the more technology advances, the more antennas and the harder it is to turn them off. So you were saying, well, could I just turn it off? So let me say two things to that. If you have a cell phone and you have to use it for work and you're still, you're on the journey of learning how to reduce exposure, one tip is turn the phone antennas off you're not using. If you're only using cellular, have it on speaker, but make sure the Bluetooth's off, the Wi-Fi's off, the hotspot's off. Turn off all those other antennas. With 5G, these phones are just coming out now. I know Apple's coming out with a new 5G phone. I don't know if they can be turned off and if they'll stay off. There are new phones now where when you turn it off, it comes back on when you restart the phone. So for every phone you have, turn off what you're not using and check that each time. Sometimes the older phones are easier to stay off, but I wish I could make a recommendation. This is why it's so important that everyone take action so that we can have meaningful policy change. The personal things we do are going to be helpful and reduce exposure, but they will not solve our problem. They won't adequately and fully reduce to the levels we need to get to. We actually have to shift the laws that we have in the United States government. And we have to call on our manufacturers. Anyone on this call who wants to start a campaign like they, boycott 5G phones or hey, Apple, don't put that 5G antenna in my phone. I don't want 5G. We have to start pressuring our companies to create devices that have hardware and software changes that protect people, that reduce exposure, that can be hardwired. You can actually hardwire your phone with an Ethernet for many models. I don't know about the new ones that are just coming out now, but for the older models, you can turn all the antennas off, plug it in with an Ethernet, and do everything except make voice calls. So when my daughter's friends come over, who all are Instagram and all this social media insanity that's happening, they connect to the wire so that in my home, I don't have all these cell phones on all the time, and I have a wire available. You have to get an adapter for it. I hope that sort of answers and adds more, and I wish I had simple answers on this one.
Thanks, Theodora. Up next, we have Benny. Benny, go ahead, please.
Thanks so much, Theodora. What about, I know about putting it to your head. What about just holding it in your hand?
Mm-hmm.
Is there a problem just holding it in your hand, the cell phone?
Well, that's a very good question. And there's research that has shown changes in the blood from exposure. Why do we think that if it's in your hand, it won't affect our body when our blood is flowing through our body, when our tissue is, there's scientists are saying use corded connections. So if you use a corded phone like this, I'm going to unplug the internet. My phone is all the way over there. I can't grab it, but just a regular corded phone will not have emissions. So we recommend reducing exposure to as much as possible, actually.
Thanks, Theodora. Up next, we have David. David, we are looking forward to your question.
Hi, Theodora. Very good presentation, and thank you. Definitely has woke me up over the last couple of years that I've heard you on these conferences. But I don't know if I have a question, more of a comment. I almost feel helpless in the sense of I have 4 young kids, and technology keeps moving forward, and we embrace technology, but I just don't see a way personally that I can prevent all of this, advancement in the sense of I see the towers coming up. I live in Michigan. I see the automotive industry. They're putting 5G into every single vehicle. And, I have wireless in my own home. Even if I was to get rid of wireless, my neighbors have wireless. And, everywhere we go, we have wireless in the schools. And it just seems like a losing battle with technology moving forward. I guess what can we do as, I know you mentioned to get involved with, politics, but I'm just a normal, human, or in the sense of like parent. I don't have those types of resources nor the time, and I can't run away from technology. So do you have some simple solutions other than, trying to change inside of our house that we can implement.
Do you mean other than in your house, or do you want to know in your house?
I mean, I guess I want some reasonable solutions other than, what can we do out, even in my own house, I have a battle with that because I have old iPhones, and my kids, grab them and watch YouTube on them, and they're wireless. And it's like, if I take them away, they're going to fight me over that. And I'm sure your kids give you the same battles. So, I just I just feel like I'm fighting a losing battle here.
I think it can be overwhelming, the technology, but I have to say change is happening. I mean, in many countries, Wi-Fi is being banned in kindergarten and removed from classrooms. There are many schools around the world where they're removing Wi-Fi and putting in corded connections. So I guess I would say take one step, start on the journey with, one step that you can take that's sort of simple, like at night, turn off the wireless. And I know kids, my daughter I have all these blocks. I should have brought one, wooden blocks, decorated like a phone, because of course, mommy's on the phone, child's on the phone. And now I have teenagers, and I am not standing here as someone who's a perfect mom or has a perfect world or has solved this problem perfectly in my own home. But I do know that change is happening. In France, they just passed a law where, actually it was now 2 years, where when you buy a phone, it says, keep off the abdomens of teenagers and keep away from pregnant women's abdomens. So it happens, but it's only going to happen if we really start talking about this. And I know we're all busy and have, working and between kids. It is very hard to get organized on this issue. But I think that everyone can find something to do, something in your own home. And I imagine you're connected with the other folks in Michigan. There are a lot of people in Michigan working on this. You don't have to be into politics to get involved. Our representatives are supposed to be accountable to us. And even if you just set one meeting and tell people what you think, we're there to represent you, make the changes in your home. I'm actually inspired by what's happening around the world. The New Hampshire Commission, that was an expert report by several experts, and things are happening. So I understand that feeling, but I always say many hands make light work, and it's happening around the world and around the United States. And we're doing it for our kids, so it's happening. And thank you for continuing to get educated on this issue.
Thank you, Theodora. And up next, we have Gregory. Gregory, looking forward to your question.
Hi, thanks for your presentation. I really enjoyed it. I guess like the previous gentleman, kind of feel overwhelmed with all of the areas of exposure. And I guess I wanted to know what would be maybe a top 3 solutions that we could start, to get the most bang for our buck, because it seems like there's so many areas. And then I guess the second question is, I'm kind of new to this information. How do I guess, continue to sell it to myself? Where do I go? What resources do you have? And then how do I sell it to others, my family? How do, because it's a tough sell, because there's so much that we, so many areas where we use Wi-Fi. And
it is a tough sell. Yeah. I'm going to give you the top 3. I'm putting in the chat a link to how to reduce cell phone radiation on our website at Environmental Health Trust. And that is a good page to start off with resources. I also am going to put in the chat, just so you have it, some facts about cell phones that I'm putting in the chat as well. So the first thing is, don't put the phone to your head anymore. Don't carry it on your body when it's powered on. Try to have it away from your body. When you go somewhere, if you have to have a phone, many people don't have any other way to even communicate. You don't have a corded phone at home. You haven't set that up yet. And frankly, it costs money to do that. So there's this whole issue of affordability involved. But put the phone on the table away from you on speaker. Don't use it for things that aren't as important. Minimize your use. And then I guess so learn how to reduce exposure to your phone. At night, whatever you can turn it off, or whatever you can move into another room, move it into the other room. And don't use your phone while it's charging. So I would sort of start with the devices that you use every day and keeping a distance from your body. That's where I would start, and there has been, I'm not sure if I clarified this as clearly, but there was no pre-market safety testing for cell phones when it first came on the market. There's no post-market surveillance, and there's no US government entity that has a funded mandate to be reviewing all the science, staying up to date, and looking at what level is safe. That's just the reality. So we also have, I'm going to put in the chat, and if you're watching this later, go to our website at Environmental Health Trust, where we have a tab called Resources. And under that, we have printable resources, and I'm going to put that in the chat so you can see a lot of downloadable resources. We have one-pagers. I didn't bring any with me today. I had it from before, but we have little one-sheets you can download and learn more about this issue with simple tips. It is easy to get started on this. Sorry if I overwhelm folks. I mean, I understand this is a big one, and it's so important that I've dedicated, and many scientists have dedicated their lives to this over the last few decades. But it's actually simple to get started and reduce exposure to your cell phone. So that's what I'd say.
Thank you, Theodora, and you're all doing an amazing job breaking this down for us. So with that, we'll bring out Julie for our next question. Julie, looked like you were unmuted for a second, but I see you muted now. Just hit that one more time, if you would.
Oh, me?
No, I got it. It was me. Okay. Thank you so much. I'm concerned about the effect on the developing brain. And do you have studies on this effect on literacy and learning? I know they're taking them out of the schools, but we really need to talk about literacy and how our children are not being able to progress in school the way they should, or they're not even prepared to learn to read or learn from reading. Can you tell me if you have any studies on your website?
I do, and I'm going to put it in the chat. So underneath, actually, I'm going to show everyone this because this will be helpful. So you can find this on our website. Let me share with you. I hope I'm sharing the right thing here. Okay, so this is our website here, and we have studies. If you go under key issues, there's two ways to access the information. One, if you're interested in 5G, for example, we have science here, scientific research on 5G. You want research on impacts from wireless radiation on the developing brain, go up to science. We have our research by Environmental Health Trust experts, scientific conferences. But then here, research on 5G, wireless, cancer studies specifically. And if you scroll down, we have screens in children that has much research looking at the impact of the overuse of screens, everything from physical effects to impacts on learning to the radiation effects, and then impacts on brain development here and synergistic effects, children's vulnerability. So we can just go to brain development, and there's a discussion of much of the research. This is Dr. Volkow was talking about at NIH. Here's Dr. Taylor talking about impacts to memory and attention. And then if you scroll down, we have studies that are citations with some of the key aspects of the conclusions and from the abstracts. We have all of that on our website. And just so you know, under key issues, under Wi-Fi, we also have this section under science. So for all of our key issues, we have a section on the science related to it. And here's research on Wi-Fi frequencies more specifically. And it's discussed. And then we have compendiums of the research studies. This is peer-reviewed, published research. So we have it all online. If you just take some time and go to the website. I know there is a lot there, but we want to ensure we have the science. We have easy to understand sections, and then we have the science list. So I hope that's helpful.
Well, what an incredible resource. And thanks for walking us through that, Theodora. That's really helpful. Up next, we have Francis. If you go ahead, we're looking forward to your question. Francis, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, but yeah, there we go. Just want to make sure you're unmuted. Thank you.
Hi, thank you, Theodora, for your good work. I just want to make people aware of the increased use of microwaves in cars. I just Googled and I found there was a company called VAYAR, VAYYAR, which was granted a waiver by the FCC on April 19th of this year to install 60 gigahertz 5G technology in a car, supposedly to monitor against heat stroke in babies that are locked in cars by their parents while they go shopping. So can you imagine the implications of something like this? And also the increased use of radar technology. And imagine millions of cars on the road with radars and their effects on people, including the drivers, their mentation, their thinking while they're driving, and people standing next to these radars when the car is not in motion. These are tremendous areas, and the FCC is granting waivers against regulations, apparently, to allow these kinds of applications. So, I mean, it's just something that people should be aware of, and maybe your group can expand into that direction. Thank you.
Yes, we are deeply concerned about what's happening with cars because they have so many sensors. All these new cars have numerous antennas, and they will have that radar, all of these emissions from the cars. We have all these cars, all these emissions, some of which can be turned off and some can't. So if you have a car, you can turn some of the antennas off depending on your model. You have to find out about it. But the reality is that we have to raise this issue with manufacturers and let them know what they want, because I'm shocked, really, the amount of new technology they're bringing into cars. You said they had a technology to see if a child is left in the back, and yet those same frequencies have been shown to harm the developing brain of children. Now, speaking of radar, there's research going back decades to the Cold War by the US government and many other governments, Russian governments as well, showing radar's effect on servicemen. And a lot of those effects are what's documented now in science. So there's nothing new. And the government has these reports by the CIA and NASA. And it's just mind-blowing that we're continuing to roll this out. And that's why it's so important that we be aware of it and get some action on this. Because I agree, we are trying to raise this with our, in government. I know that Dr. Joel Moskowitz of UC Berkeley has a wonderful page. If you search Safer EMR, that's his webpage. And then he has a section on cars, and he tries to keep track of the issues related to cars and what's going on. There's been modeling in cars that shows when there's frequencies inside of a car, because it's metal, the frequencies can bounce around and actually enhance, or there can be reflections, unusual ways it moves in a car. So we think that it's outrageous that they be putting these frequencies in cars and outside of cars, actually. So there's a lot of work to be done. That's why we are just thankful for all the work happening at the international level. And manufacturers are aware of this issue. We know it because they are lowering the levels in certain cars, and sometimes reports on that gets out. I think Dr. Moskowitz has that on his site. So we know they're aware of it, but because our government regulations are non-protective, it's still happening. And we're suing the FCC on that issue. We have a federal case now. We're waiting for the court decision, Environmental Health Trust et al. Versus the FCC, because our federal regulations are non-protective.
Thank you, Theodora. Up next, we're going to bring out Renee. Renee, if you can unmute yourself, please. I think I just sent you a note to unmute yourself. Let's try that one more time.
Hey there. Thank you. Thanks so much for all your work. I'm wondering if you have any experience with the QI devices. They're the EMF protection devices. QI Home, it's QI.
You know, we don't recommend devices, but we don't study them. We're not testing them. What we are advocating for is that that governments have protocols in place to adequately test all of these devices that have come on the market. There's so many, I couldn't speak to each one. And even if there are people who state that they feel better from certain devices, and you know, I haven't seen the long-term studies on that, but there are people who do. The question is, will you have the long-term benefits? So I wish I could answer that question. And what we need is, you know, adequate regulations and protocols for testing so we can compare devices and understand if they're making the frequencies less biologically active, which some are claiming to do. But our scientists don't focus on those devices. There's so many of them. And I put in the chat our newsletter. Please sign up for our newsletter. We have a monthly newsletter from our nonprofit organization. We give you the latest science and policy.
Thank you, Theodora. We are bringing this shortly to a close. I'm wondering, do you have time for one more?
Yeah.
Oh. Great. Thank you. And so, Ryan, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Thank you. And thank you, Theodora, and everyone at Environmental Health Trust for getting the message out. I'm on that journey. I'll be very brief here. I've gone through the phases of feeling helpless. I'm actually taking steps to reduce my exposure. I work in IT, so I have a lot. But I have a specific question about you mentioned smart meters and how people have been able to opt out or have them removed. But oftentimes there is a fee. There is a fee in my state, and I'm working with our government to try to get that removed or at least lowered in some way. Do you have any resources or recommendations when talking with, it's going to be the Corporation Commission, they're in charge of approving that. We used to not even have the ability to have it removed. But for example, I've moved somewhere, it already has a smart meter. Mm-hmm. So just any advice on getting those fees lowered or removed?
Well, I put in the chat our page on smart meters that has a lot of information for you. There have been, you got to do what you're doing, because the states that have the free opt-out, that happened because people got on the issue and had meetings. There are lawsuits now actually that are happening where people with cancer are saying, look, I don't want the smart meter and I shouldn't have to pay not to have it, or people with other health issues. So getting awareness on it, being aware of the court cases and the decisions. In Pennsylvania, there was just a case that was one where people who they were putting the smart meters on, the case that was won was, hey, you can't force a smart meter on a home. So take a look at what's been done in other states. We stopped our water meters from becoming smart in our town, and that happened from people organizing, doing what you're doing, talking to the officials, and just not stopping until you get it done. But make sure you have all the letters and resources and you know what states are doing what. It's very helpful to say, hey, these states don't have fees. Why should we be charged a fee? One other quick thing. If they're trying to charge a fee, ask, well, what's the money for? And can you document that you are incurring these extra costs? They'll say, well, we have to drive up and read the meter now, except they're already charging you for putting in the smart meters. And so they're not able to actually, we haven't found that they can document where those increased needs for fees actually are in actual documentation. I put it in the chat, the link.
That's great. And thank you for adding everything to the chat. And quite frankly, thank you in general. You are an advocate. You are out there fighting the good fight for all of us. And we really, really appreciate it. Again, everyone, you can see ehtrust.org there on the screen. And as you saw, just a phenomenal resource for all of us. We are at a time. We're sorry we couldn't get to every question, but there'll be more. And Theodora, hopefully you'll be back with us again as well. And you know, I want to thank you up and down for what you do. But I have a feeling I'm not the only one. So I'm going to ask my tech team to unmute our audience. I'm sure. What do you all want to say to Theodora?
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Theodora, for all your work.
Important stuff.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the work that you do.
Please talk and try to always talk to
Thank
anyone.
you. God bless you.
Work.
I love you.
Thank you
Keep
so
up
much.
the good work.